It's bonkers. Go read it. Evil Ernie, Youth Gone Wild. I am amazed at how much I like this book. These two characters show up a lot throughout my history. My dad and my stepmom they are pretty big horror hounds, and she gave me this issue and a few Lady Death comics back in high school. And they didn't really appeal to me, but after reading this, I am a fan now. This specific copy I actually found at my favorite used bookstore for the same price that it sold back when it was brand new. Because at some point, embarrassingly, I purged my comic box and got rid of the ones that I didn't think I wanted anymore. Only to start a YouTube channel that reviews old random back issue comics, and now I'm purchasing the ones that I used to have. But anyway, I'm looking forward to reviewing the Lady Death comics that I also bought a little bit later on, and reviewing the action figure. So get on with it. Youth Gone Wild is actually a reprinting of Evil Ernie's origin story. They reissued it under the new Chaos Comics label. This is one of my new favorite dedication pages ever, to Mom for lighting the fire and Dad for pouring gasoline on it. Perfect. Again, here's our list of responsible parties. Brian Pulido has been doing comics for a long time, and from what I hear, he's also directed a couple of movies, which is surprising. Stephen Hughes, I don't know much about him, mostly just his work on Evil Ernie. As far as I know, Brian Pulido is still doing Lady Death comics. I believe he's crowdfunding them, and they're still very successful. The story starts with this family hiding out in a boarded up house and this dumb kid making noises that wake up the dead. And they start bashing their way in. This channel's other mission is all about learning from other artists, and right away, you see something not to do. If you have 3 characters, regardless if they're related, do whatever you can to make sure they don't all look exactly the same. It's just a little strange to see such potential in the artwork, and then be able to spot the flaws so easily. There's such a hard contrast between the two. The artwork almost makes me almost makes me feel like they were doing this comic when they were still in high school. I'm really back and forth on the artwork all the way through this book. There's so much going on, a lot of crazy action, but then there'll be questionable, there'll be questionable character designs, or some foreshortening that doesn't exactly work, but I really appreciate the effort to do something different in the panel. But then you'll get something like that, and that is just awesome looking. But the parents of these kids are freaking out that this kid's gonna wake up Evil Ernie and he'll come for them. And he does! Ernie kills the father, he chases the mother and the son into the cemetery, but that's Ernie's domain, so he finds them there. They ask him why is he doing this, and he tells them it's for love. The undead drag them down and kill them, and then Lady Death shows up. And this is basically a snippet of what this whole comic is about. Ernie killing people just to impress Lady Death. Because she hates the living. Turns out that's Ernie's fantasy world, because he is a patient in a mental hospital. Meanwhile, we cut to Mary Young and I believe her 2 brothers and her sister at breakfast. And she tells them about her new project, that they're gonna cure psychopaths with this new technology. And Ernie certainly fits that description. We're introduced to Dr. Leonard Price, Ernie's first psychiatrist doctor trying to help him. You really get a sense of their relationship. He ends up feeling a lot like Dr. Loomis and Michael Myers, that type of relationship. He's always talking about how Ernie is basically evil and should be shot, basically put out of his misery before he hurts anybody else. Ernie and Price met because of Ernie's parents. They were worried about him, that he was so withdrawn. And then that's juxtaposed. That is countered with images of his parents beating him. So Dr. Price uses his own fancy machine to try and probe Ernie's dreams to see if he can help him open up. And this thing is straight out of an 80s anime. All that really does is open up a a link. It creates a psychic link between Lady Death and eventually Evil Ernie. And she basically promises that if he kills people, that she'll love him for it. Motivation! So Ernie kills his parents and gets locked up. And Mary is convinced that they're gonna cure Evil Ernie. And that sounds great, the Evil Ernie. This is one of those foreshortening moments that they tried to do that I don't think paid off well, but I appreciate them trying to work within the frame and make the frame more interesting than just a flat image. There's some more fantasy imagery. Ernie's showing off to Lady Death, telling her what he would do, the lengths he would go to be with her. Here we're introduced to Commissioner Stone, the douchey guy representing a group of investors in the technology that's going to cure Ernie. This looks like it came out of Heavy Metal Magazine. And at this point, it clicked in my brain that I was like, how was this never a movie made in the 90s? Thus far, this story has a lot of hallmarks of someone that's a big fan of horror movies. You have the main character that is basically raising her siblings. There's no parents to speak of. You have a hallucinatory, crazy person. You have the doctor, like Dr. Loomis. And you have a crazy machine that nothing's going to go right. It's kind of like the transporter in the Jeff Goldblum The Fly movie. And this is the moment where it's all going to hit the fan. Dr. Price... he freaks out and tries to kill Ernie before it's too late. They start the operation, and Ernie is hallucinating that he's seeing Lady Death again, and right when she kisses him, that's when he explodes. Up until this point, it's been kind of unclear whether or not Lady Death is just a hallucination made up by Ernie to cope with his abusive parents, or if it's really happening. Mary is freaking out that they've killed Ernie. The Commissioner Stone is at a party to celebrate the success of the new technology. A little bit of counting your chickens, I think. And this sweet, kindly nurse gives Ernie a button. And that's when we're introduced to Smiley. Smiley doesn't do a whole lot in this story, but in later stories I've seen that he ends up being like the sidekick to Ernie, and they frequently disagree with each other. Ernie's then resurrected, and he finds out that the people that he kills comes back, and he can control them. And they eventually, he refers to them as friends. And from here on out, the story is basically what I said before. It's bonkers. A lot of it felt like, if you've ever seen Return of the Living Dead, it starts with one little incident, and then it just gets progressively crazier and crazier. The cops get overrun. Eventually, Ernie has a tank. Dr. Price apparently keeps a large collection of guns in his office, and drives a crazy 4x4. At this point, Mary has become full Ellen Ripley, and they're off to find Ernie. Lady Death is a tease this whole story, as women do, and Ernie is constantly chasing after her. So right when he's about to finally get with her, there's a knock on the door. And you could say that basically because of that, and shooting Ernie in the head, the rest of the third act becomes a revenge story, and Ernie starts going after Mary's family. Sometimes with these reviews, I feel a little bad spoiling the whole story, because why would you go read it if I just tell you what happens? But you should read this one, especially if you like horror movies. Like I said before, I don't know why this wasn't turned into a movie series. Evil Ernie is totally like those classic horror characters like Freddy Krueger. I honestly could see him being a franchise. So that's going to do it for me, and I'll see you next week with another video. Thanks, bye. Bonus review! Since I'm finishing up this recording on Christmas Eve, and I am wearing a Santa hat just for you guys, you're welcome. I figured why not take a look at the toy. So Ernie is sculpted by Claiborne Moore. He's actually credited on the packaging, which is rare. He studied in Florence, Italy, so they really went all out trying to get a sculpture that could accurately represent characters. I imagine they were trying to compete with McFarlane Toys like everyone else was in the 90s. He looks pretty great. You can see the mine is missing. It looks like the paint on his teeth got messed up. But I like that they I like his smiley button on his lapel. And there's his gross necro-fiery stomach thing. And since they were trying to compete with McFarlane, you can see that these toys are Ernie is basically a plastic statue. He has very little in the way of points of articulation. You can move his two arms, and his legs have a V cut, so they spread out to the sides. He comes with a very 90s gun, an axe, and two skull-topped knives that are covered in blood. And also a stand to put his foot peg, or, put a foot peg on him. You can see mine must have gone through something crazy, some kind of oven, or sitting in a car for too long, because his base is warped. I actually had to take a heat gun to it to try and straighten it out a little bit. Overall, I like him. I'm glad to have him. There's a lot of these Claiborne Moore statues. They're all pretty much the same. I have a handful of them to review for other comics, such as Witchblade, and when we do the Lady Death series. But they're cool. And, to wrap it all up, I learned a lot more than I knew before I read this book about Evil Ernie. I always thought that he was like a character that lorded over Lady Death. I didn't realize that she was the one that manipulates him. And then I guess in the later series, they do a backstory for her and where she comes from. So, looking forward to that. That's it, guys. Have a great Christmas. I'll see you next week.